friends, I served for 8 years on the board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals Central South Carolina chapter in Columbia. I held every seat on the executive committee, treasurer, secretary, vice president, and then I was president. And I was serving as president of our AFP chapter, and we were helping our state nonprofit association. At that point it was called SCANPO, the South Carolina Association of Nonprofit Organizations. They're now called Together SC. We were helping SCANPO get ready for their state convention. And I got a call, and someone said, "Have you heard about this NANOE stuff?" And I said, "No, I don't know where it is." They said, "Well, it's Jimmy LaRose." They said, Jimmy scheduled the NANOE conference in Columbia. And I said, okay, and it's at the same time as the SCANPO conference. And so I said, okay, and they said, "Lewis, you got to do something about this. He can't do this." And I said, "Well, why do I have to do something about it?" They said, "Because you're the president. You got to call him and stop him. Somebody's got to stop him. He must be stopped." So I called Jimmy. Now, I had met Jimmy a couple of times, right? But we hadn't really spent a lot of time together. And I called him, right? And I remember where I was on the street in Columbia, and he was out of town leading a conference, and we spent a half an hour on the phone together. And I just need to let you know, I gave him hell. I said, "Jimmy, you can't do this." And it was not a pleasant conversation for 30 minutes because I took umbrage with this effort. And I want to let you know that most people, if they had had this conversation with me, would never talk to me again. They would go, because we're in the South, they would go and talk about me behind my back. But never again would I hear from them because I was not nice on this conversation with Jimmy. But at the end of this conversation, instead of just hanging up the phone, instead of just being mad, instead of going off and talking about me behind my back, Jimmy said, "Why don't you join my wife and I for dinner in my home?" And I want to let you know, as a person of faith, that was a biblical moment for me, because rather than just casting me off, he said, "Come into my home, visit with me, break bread with me." And even though I had been raised and cut my teeth on AFP, every time I got to an issue with Jimmy about the nonprofit sector and the way things ought to be done, I agreed with him. The problem is, all these things that people had told me about Jimmy LaRose weren't true. Everything he said was right. And it was from that day forward that I became a believer, and that I began to take on this project that we call NANOE. I want to let you know that in Jimmy LaRose, you will find someone who truly cares about you, who truly is willing to invest in your life, who truly cares about all the children and families across this nation and this world that we're trying to help. He's a person of integrity, and he works harder than anyone else I have ever met. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, he lives and breathes NANOE. Now, I want to let you know, you probably have figured out that I'm a pretty passionate person, right? And Jimmy's a passionate person. And we've gotten in a lot of heated and passionate discussions. But he's never yelled at me about anything except one thing. And I want to tell you that story. So about 6 months ago, we're working with an organization, Habitat for Humanity, and we wanted to sit down with their CEO, Roy Kramer. And Jimmy says, "Well, let's have Roy over for lunch." So I get to go again to Jimmy's house and have lunch, and he invites Roy in, and we're talking over lunch over this pizza. Now, Jimmy's from New York, so when I'm eating pizza in Jimmy's house, I'm eating good pizza, right? It's New York pizza. It's the best pizza in the Columbia, South Carolina area. And then he had these things on a plate that were sitting up on the counter that I had never seen before. And I kind of had figured out that it was dessert because it looked like it had a pastry shell and it had some powder and had some cream in it. And I like dessert, and I was kind of waiting for this to come. But I didn't know what it was. And so Jimmy starts coming over with these things. I said, "What are those?" He said, "They're cannolis." Now, friends, I was raised in Farmville, Virginia. We only had 7,000 people in the town that I was raised, and 6,999 of them were born right there in Farmville, Virginia. We only had one guy from New York, and he made pizza. He was the Tony Perini. He made the best pizza, but he didn't have cannolis. So Jimmy sits this cannoli in front of me, and because I'm from Farmville, my mama raised me right, I know that I'm supposed to have manners, and I use a knife and a fork. And so I go to use my fork to steady this cannoli and my knife to cut into it. And as I'm doing this, as the knife is meeting the cannoli, I see out of my peripheral vision Jimmy rising up out of his chair. And I look up, and he's got this angry look on his face, and he yells, "Don't cut the cannoli!" And then I had already cracked the shell this hard, and so he took that one away and graciously brought me another one. And he taught me the proper way to eat a cannoli. So, brothers and sisters, I want to bring up Jimmy LaRose, and I just want to let you know that as you work with him, as you talk with him, you can do anything, you can do no wrong. Just remember, don't cut the cannoli.
Yeah, that was... And that's a wonderful story that that Lewis talks about the fact that we invited him over. But do you want to know what the important thing was? He came. He came over. Because relationships are transactional. I'd like you to know that I hold the NANOE credentials, and that we're going to talk about overcoming the house of org. The first time I laid eyes on Lewis Fawcett, he handed me a check, because I had nominated Bishop Redfern for Volunteer of the Year, and RFP chapter had put in place honorariums to the nonprofits that won that particular award. So you gotta love a guy who gives you a check the first time you meet him. And if I may say, I was in Las Vegas. He gave me that ring. He was pressing through these issues about NANOE, and he even asked me about CFRE. Why CFRE? And here's what I knew, though. I knew he was a good guy. I mean, I had the phone out here, but I knew he was a good guy. I knew he was a good guy. And he's been our champion ever since. I was recently asked a question by a journalist. "Jimmy, why has there been such an overwhelming positive response to NANOE?" You'll say, "Jimmy, I put NANOE into Google. I don't see that overwhelming positive response." Well, there's about 4 people that have negatively written about NANOE. But I'm pleased to share with you today that we have 1,100 paying members, and we're only 2 years old. And I thought about it, and I thought about Dr. Robinson, and everybody is being so gracious to me and kind of acknowledging Jimmy. You would know that if she was here, it would be Jimmy LaRose and Dr. Robinson, or Dr. Robinson, Jimmy LaRose, should I say. And I thought about Red, and I thought about Honey and Scott and Jack and Lewis and Tracy. And I realized that the reason there's such a positive response is we're all together in this. And we're on each other's side. And in this day and age, sides have not become positive things. There's so many sides, right? But friends, humans are tribal. And when we do find shared values, we gather together around them. And I think that's why we're here today. And we didn't exist 3 years ago. We only went public 2 years ago. And now we are the fastest growing nonprofit membership network in the world. In the United States. So we're not alone. Now, as I said earlier, you spend your life ensuring other people experience life worth living. It is a high call. It is vocational. And since I have spent my entire life in the nonprofit sector, I have gotten to work with you, the finest people in the world. Imagine not having to be in the corporate sector or having to climb the corporate ladder or being involved in the bureaucratic nature of government and keeping your job. Imagine getting to spend my entire life with other need meters. You are great need meters. And it's just wonderful that we get to share all of this together. You don't want to be frustrated. You don't want to be disrespected. You don't want to be persecuted. You don't want to be underpaid. But I think the reason NANOE has become so successful so quickly is because people have found out here that you're not crazy. You've thought all these things. You've said all these things. And finally, there's a group that's coalescing around these big ideas, and it's okay. So, how do we end the chaos? Ultimately, we are the antidote. And even though we are changing donors' hearts and minds, and even though we're going with these general audiences with Broken for Good, unless we make decisions personally about setting boundaries, unless I can get the nonprofit sector to change first, if I can't have you make this shift personally and understand what it means for you, and how are you going to work all of this out for you personally, until we do it in this room, we aren't going to be able to get other people to follow. So we are the antidote. You are NANOE. Now, how do we get here? People have come in faith. People have come to this event previously, and at this point in faith, they have never known the story of how we got here. And I'm about to share with you that the reason we're here is one reason only: empirical data. Friends, most of the time when we think things through, we go with what we believe and what's in our gut and what we know. And most of the time I have found out that I'm just wrong after I look at the data. And the data flies in the face. And I'm not talking about some sort of Gallup poll for an election or something. I'm talking about clinical statistical surveys, which drove this movement from the beginning. And I thought you'd just be interested in seeing a few slides as to why we're here. In 1990, I became a fundraiser. Joy Ranch Home for Children, I was their director of development. It was previously followed by me doing parish ministry, and Joy Ranch was in my congregation. Now, my boss allowed me to hire a fundraising consultant, and I was making $120 a week as a director of development, and he was making $600 a day. And he had that accordion box. You remember those accordion kind of cardboard file boxes? And man, he would come every month and I would photocopy everything in there, and I got everything out. And I started this firm in my first year of being a fundraiser. The numbers of ways that was wrong are countless. But you want to know why I did it? Because my boss came to me and said, Jimmy, I want you to do one thing. I want you to find one person that knows less about fundraising than you, and I want you to help them. And you should be paid. And it was Free Will Baptist Home for Children that sent out a newsletter in 1990 typed on an IBM Selectric that I got to my desk. And I said, maybe I could help them. And Development Systems International was born. So 10 years later, Dr. Robinson and I, not knowing each other, entered the same space because the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiative started the Compassion Grant, and they were distributed. You may remember this. That administration put in to every cabinet position, Health and Human Services, HUD, Department of Justice, they put centers on philanthropy. And then the government sent the compassion grants to the state level, and they ended up being distributed at the state level. And by the way, not having met, we both read Sustaining Nonprofit Performance, The Case for Capacity Building by Paul Light. This book ended up on the White House desk. It ended up on the foundation's desk. It ended up on donors' desks. And here's what it said. Stop giving to program only, but every time you give a program gift, give a restricted gift to capacity building. So help that nonprofit with program, but help them hire a director of development. Give that nonprofit program monies, but have them put in place an event plan or a direct mail plan, et cetera. The case for capacity building. What's interesting is financial capacity building still isn't even mainstreamed in our own nonprofits. But basically, broadly, what we have been talking about this morning is building capacity and placing the same level of commitment that we do to serving a population as we do to building capacity. So we read this book separately. We still haven't met. Then in 2005, 4 years later, Dr. Robinson attends a non-fundraising awareness event that I was hosting in the Midlands up in Columbia. And she decided that Major Gifts Ramp Up was going to be what she was going to fund with that compassion money. Meaning, she would give people money for a restricted gift for capacity building, but if only they attended a Major Gifts Ramp Up event. She was doing boosting capacity, I was doing building capacity. For those of you who have been to a Major Gifts Ramp Up event, please know that we are inserting new guidelines for nonprofits, all 6 of them, throughout the model. But if I may say, can you see that Dr. Robinson decided if I'm going to give a capacity building gift to a nonprofit, I want them to experience this model first so they can be a good steward of the monies that I give them. That's where we met. That happened in 2005. Now, this is interesting. 10 years later, after Paul's book, 10 years later. Now remember, the book was written in 2001, but Dr. Robinson and I met in 2005. Dr. Robinson, being the genius that she is, she decided to evaluate impacts. So she went back and she found out that Paul Light, who wrote this book, got $2 million from Princeton and did not reach a clinical sample when he surveyed the nonprofits. So that irritated her a little bit. She then decided, I am going to perform a Harvard-type statistical study over the last 10 years since Paul Light's book came out, and I am going to make sure I involve 487 CEOs who received a restricted capacity building gift in the last decade, and I'm going to find out what happened. Interestingly enough, she came to National Development Institute, which I founded about 28 years ago, because we have the largest file of nonprofit CEOs in the world. So in order for her to reach a statistical sample of 487 individuals to be surveyed, she partnered with National Development Institute to reach out to these CEOs and participate in that study. This is where we began to bond together. We certainly bonded at the Major Gifts Ramp Up event. It was so gracious for her to sow into a young man and to fund us and to fund other individuals. But here is where NANOE began to experience its cognitive development. Now, here's what the study revealed. 85% of nonprofits who received a restricted capacity building gift in the last 10 years in no way, shape, or form built new capacity. Should any of us be surprised? No. You know what we should be surprised about? Somebody asked me what we should be surprised about. Thank you for asking. 15% did. 15% did. And here's what happened. In this 15%, and we did this during the greatest downturn in the economy since the Great Depression. That's when we did this survey. The 15% had at least one C-suite level executive, CEO, CFO, COO, CDO, with a business background based in free market enterprise principles. Number 2, they built capacity over a 5-year period, more capacity than those nonprofits who indicated they stagnated or declined during the same time period, the recession. They grew their nonprofits regardless of the size and involvement of their board. They externalized their mission for the purpose of revenue generation. They rewrote their mission statements to include donors. Most of you have mission statements that all that's happening is you're using them to attract more people that can't pay you. What if we were able to put donors in our statement of mission and include them at the same level we do the population that we serve? They developed board members who evaluated the chief executive and promoted the goals and values of the CEO. Now that's very cryptic, but I'm letting you know that these boards didn't do much more than that. They developed board members who evaluated the chief executive and promoted the goals and values of the CEO. In conclusion, though 15% of charities flourished, 85% of nonprofits were so poorly structured that no amount of money in the world would improve their ability to achieve impact. Now, as a result of this study, do you know there's still IBM software from the social services that took our data? We have this data. And a doctoral student, Dr. Kimberly Brown, emerged and took that data, and imagine the title, This is craziness. Imagine this title. She did a 400-page doctoral dissertation called Factors Explaining Nonprofit Leaders' Intention to Build Capacity. That is fundamental. That is lowest common denominator. Factors explaining a nonprofit leader's intention to build capacity. Because we want to build capacity, and we have to find out the psychological nature of it, what a CEO is going through. Are they a CEO? Are they executive director? Et cetera, et cetera. But the point is this 400-page doctoral thesis, in a sense, combined with that study, launched NANOE because of what was revealed. I, working through the study and working then through the doctoral thesis, tried to put it in layman's terms with reimagining philanthropy. And we've sold 13,000 copies, and it's an industry bestseller. Then, Dr. Robinson, after reading my book, said, no, Jimmy, I think I can do a better job than you can. I will make it accessible to the general public. And when we first gathered as governors, we had 110 pages called New Guidelines for Tomorrow's Nonprofits. And as governors, we all worked on them, and she took all that data and further expanded it. I am pleased to say that 2 years later, it is no longer New Guidelines for Tomorrow's Nonprofits. It is no longer 110 pages. There's no longer 12 guidelines. Here's where we're at. She reduced it down to 6 guidelines because of your work, but she expanded it from 110 pages to 1,088. New Guidelines for Nonprofits. You are all members of NANOE. They are in the capacity building library. It is a desk reference. It is what you as a CEO or a development officer have behind you, because what you're about to share with your board and your leadership defies convention. There is nothing in the nonprofit sector that will say that you are right. Everybody will say you're wrong. Respected people will say you're wrong, and you have to have new guidelines for nonprofits to back you up. Then, we took new guidelines and we brought it to the state associations. We brought it to AFP, and it was patently and flatly rejected. And I'll tell you a little bit about it now, but the reason it was rejected is because it identified the programs and products that no longer work in the nonprofit sector. And because of that, because we couldn't go to our existing associations, because we couldn't go to the media outlets, because we couldn't go to AFP, because we couldn't go to the National Council of Nonprofits, we figured out and decided with this group of people that are here today that we had to form NANOE in order to disseminate this information. NANOE credentialing, CNE, CDE, CNC, is about driving you into Dr. Robinson's curriculum. There are 3 exams. You've already all paid for this, your event pass included, your credentialing fees. CNE is Certified Nonprofit Executive. It's 200 questions. CDE is Certified Development Executive. It's 150 questions. And Certified Nonprofit Consultant, it's 100 questions. And the purpose of this is not to figure out whether at your age, Larry Rubin, you can take a test. I'm not overly concerned, being the 65, I'm joking, I'm not overly concerned about whether you can pass a test, but Dr. Robinson created the credentialing platform to drive all of us into the material to different points so it would go inside of us. When we were written up in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Tim Delaney of National Council of Nonprofits said, NANOE is so contrary to established norms that it's jolting. And I think that's a compliment. And then in no small part, our board of directors named and installed Louis Fawcett, and he has been load-bearing and an armor bearer ever since. Louis, yes. Overcoming the House of Org. What is the House of Org? Us, intermediaries. Do you know what intermediaries are? We are an intermediary. AFP is an intermediary. National Council of Nonprofits is an intermediary. ScanPo is an intermediary. TANO, MANO, FANO, LANO. HANO. Dean Wong, a NANO member in Hawaii, the Hawaiian Association of Nonprofit Organizations and Executives. I had never heard that term until 15 years ago from Dr. Robinson, but the associations of nonprofit networks are the intermediaries. Then you have the industry media, you have consultants, you have the product sellers, and you have the aggregators. What do we mean by aggregators? The United Way, your community foundation, your corporate foundation. Overcoming the House of Org is, how do we stop the ivory tower elites from making money by keeping us poor? And we didn't know in our naivete, Dr. Robinson and I took new guidelines before NANOE started to all of the individuals that were in leadership. And it was Lewis who framed it this way and said, well, Jimmy, you're dealing with ivory tower elites. And that's who is running our organizations at the national level. The reason we are driven, the reason to some degree we're immovable, is because we have been entrusted with the truth. And we must not be high-minded with the truth, but we have to remain faithful to it and keep pressing through the barriers. Truth never fears a challenge, and you are the thought leaders and innovators that this charitable sector so desperately needs. Ending the chaos is our responsibility. Here's the 10 responsibilities. First of all, we have to change our self-view. And it's just this easy, guys, because you've been getting it all morning. I am just asking you to understand. Well, here's a fun way to look at it. Allow me to pose an existential question. What is the chief function of a 501c3 corporation? And what I'm about to share with you will make your hair turn on fire and you will run out of the room. But I promise you, the chief function of a 501c3 corporation is the same as any and all corporations, to make money. Whoa! Wow. I just asked you a minute ago, what is the chief function of a nonprofit corporation? And you answered correctly by saying, make money. But what is the fundamental purpose of a 501c3 corporation? And I'll just answer it for you. It's to achieve impact. That does distinguish us from the for-profit sector in some respects, in some ways. So, significant impact. Now, Dr. Robinson will say, if you want to run a food bank out of the back of your minivan, God bless you. It's okay. We need that. But if you want to achieve significant impact, you have to figure out ways to go to scale. Dr. Robinson wrote new guidelines for nonprofits to take organizations to heroic missions of scale that make such a difference, are so transformational that money chases after them. Big bet philanthropy comes after them. And is your statement of mission and is your case for support so startling that it ruins a donor for you? Only if you're able to have a great dream backed by a sound plan that achieves significant impact. We're not charities. We're not nonprofits. We're not 501c3s. We are impact organizations. I think that's the sector that we need to transform ourselves into, repurpose, rebrand, reposition ourselves as impact organizations. Money drives impact. What do donors want? Oh, this is great, guys. We are all so wonderful talking about outputs. Our case for support documents tell about all the wonderful things we're going to do. That's outputs. But if you want to go from the 5-figure gift to the 6- and 7-figure gift, you've got to show donors outcomes. Listen, you're showing them your outputs. We've got this program and this program and this program, and it's romantically named, and it's got a 1-paragraph description, and we're going to do it for 5 years. But that's our output. And you can't have outcomes without output, and we're not going to apologize for communicating that. But if we are going to attract the big bet philanthropy, the large donor, give them the confidence to take the risk. Donors aren't risk averse. They're begging to put their money somewhere that even has a little bit of risk on it. Some angel investing. Can you give them the gift of not only outputs, but outcomes? And you will prognosticate. You need to do it with integrity. You may or may not miss the mark. Any stock prospectus that I've ever received had all of these different things in it that talked about outcomes that could fluctuate. But Dr. Robinson really invited me to talk to you about outputs versus outcomes. Connie asked me this question, Jimmy, why is it like nails on a chalkboard when we tell nonprofits to put money first? And Lewis Fawcett replied, piety. Okay. Jack Horak, are you here, Jack? I want you to know that I didn't know Jack a year ago. Jack has created a very similar organization in the Northeast called Tango and is advancing the same narratives and drew the same conclusions completely independent of us. But I called Jack Horak when I read this. Charities ceremoniously hide behind mission as an excuse to neglect the harder work of acquiring the cash they need to achieve significant impact. And when I read that, I knew I wanted to be Jack Horak's friend. Jack is sponsoring this event. He's going to be speaking tomorrow on day 2. Oh, this is piety, right? Isn't this great? Watch this. There are few sorrows in life, however poignant, in which a good income is of no avail. Guys, this is an easy one. The number one indicator of a nonprofit's ability to achieve impact is its capacity to add staff. And if you're not adding staff, you're not achieving impact. It's a simple matter of the order of things. Responsibility number 2, abolish boards as we know them. As we know them. There is one thing all boards have in common: they do not function. That was Drucker. Boards have been largely irrelevant throughout most of the 20th century. John Gillies. Board members are usually intelligent, experienced persons as individuals, yet boards as groups are mediocre. Boards tend to be, in fact, incompetent groups of competent individuals. That's John Carver. And I think Carver was wrong. You ever been involved with a board formed by people affected by an issue, hence parents of kids with cancer? Have you ever been with a board who insists the population they're serving serve as voting members? Have you ever been involved with a board who has been formed by the program participants themselves? Boards with members who are invited to join because of social status or popularity? Boards who have secured members based simply on diversity? Boards made up of members on a crusade? Boards comprised of other fellow service providers? Boards comprised of pastors? Present pastors accepted, naturally. Board members who don't attend meetings, board members comprised of other nonprofit executives, boards with members who are secure because they're rich, boards with members who are incompetent. Did I really write that? Friends, here's my point. Working group theory says this: any group that is more than 5 to 7 people is no longer a group that works. Furthermore, we are a corporation, and there is nothing, the only way this works is to understand that there's nothing natural about having a board in the first place. That you are a corporation that must apply free market enterprise principles in order to reach your goals. And that's what should drive the people that you put on your board. So in my board of directors, I have Redfern, who's an entrepreneur and a businessman who put 15,000 people on the state steps. I have in the person of Scott Hummerson, Wegner CPAs, because of his financial background. He's our treasurer. I have Jackson Doggett. I have the bat phone that I can call any time. And every time I call him because I'm angry about something being written, he says, Jimmy, just go to bed. He's our attorney. He's our legal counsel. I have Dr. Robinson, who is our program director and has spent her entire life in the nonprofit sector. Then, of course, I have Hani Korngold, who's our communications director. Since we are an enterprise, I have surrounded by myself with people that are smarter than me about all aspects of enterprise, and that's what drives my board, and our selection, and our size. This is an actual organizational chart from the University of Missouri about all the nonprofits that are within the college and the way all the different boards relate to one another. And I will just allow this to stand on its own in its presentation. This is the state of the nonprofit sector. Board training equals navel gazing. I got in trouble for this. See, what you all think is that I'm the bad one. Dr. Robinson calls me and says, Jimmy, you do know that board training equals navel gazing. And I said, what does navel gazing do? And she said, well, look at your navel. I looked at my navel and she said, what happened? I said, nothing. You get it. I had a consultant this week. I am not exaggerating. Said, Jimmy, if I had a nickel for every time I trained a board to fundraise and I didn't do it, I would be a rich man. And I said, you charged $1 million over the last 10 years training boards to fundraise that didn't do it. What do you mean if you had a nickel for it? You got $1 million for it. Responsibility number 3, stop being an ED, become a strong CEO. You changed your car, you got your board to name you after you left NANOE. You're now a CEO, Larry Rubin. Hundreds of thousands of nonprofits are run by well-meaning individuals who are unqualified and have no business being in charge of a charity. Let me just make this easy. I'm going to jump here. This is the 3-legged stool of enterprise. In this stool, you have product. Your product is change lives. Your capacity to do social impact, advance an issue, protect a rainforest, take care of a family, hospice, that is your product. Do you have a background in how are you going to market that product to as many people as possible that can spend with you? And then do you have in place a sales force that's going to go ask for the order? This is the stool of enterprise. And do we generally see our executive directors of being in charge of these elements? Generally not. Why would you ever let a medical doctor head up a hospital, a therapist oversee a counseling center, a social worker head up a children's home, an educator oversee a college? Why would you ever put these individuals in charge of an enterprise unless they were entrepreneurial CEOs with a proven record of making money? So we have things upside down in the nonprofit sector as it relates to leadership. And it's okay. Here's my only question. Are you an expert CEO? If not, become one. You absolutely, regardless of age, you can become an expert CEO. You may have to find out the things that you do well as a CEO that are right for entrepreneurship, and then fill in the gaps and shift your thinking, as Lewis said. The better question is, do you want to be a CEO? And if not, find a position that fulfills you and your mission. So often we have people that are CEOs of nonprofits that actually should be the program director, because they love the population that's being served. We must become enterprise builders who grow our charities using free market enterprise principles. So, another new guideline, which we're going to cover tomorrow, strong CEOs. Okay, overcoming the House of Org. Confront the Intermediaries, the state associations, National Council of Nonprofits, Association of Fundraising Professionals, Certified Fundraising Executive. Your state associations are fleecing you, and let me tell you how. They are selling you at their conferences. You're going to a workshop, they're using a PowerPoint presentation from 1995. And there's rarely anything new. And Scott Hummerson will tell you that these nonprofit associations are folding across the US right now. NANOE seeks to entice you into a new way of thinking by recommending that your board should practice limited engagement and responsibility. These are not board governance practices that you will learn in any way at SCANPO training sessions, or ones that we would recommend. As SCANPO members, your organization automatically participates as an affiliate member of the National Council of Nonprofit. If you are not currently receiving updates from the National Council of Nonprofits, please feel free to sign up here. This was an article titled Why We Don't Need NANOE by Madeline McGee, Together South Carolina, and SCANPO. Now, Tim Delaney, the CEO, being interviewed by Chronicle of Philanthropy, said we have 42,000 members across the US. And remember, Madeline McGee, who's the CEO of SCANPO, said, as a member of SCANPO, you're also a member of the National Council of Nonprofits. Are you getting their e-letter? Tim Delaney says National Council of Nonprofits represents 42,000 charities. Here is the truth. The National Council of Nonprofits has 38 members. We have 50 states. 38 state associations are members of National Council of Nonprofits. And National Council of Nonprofits counts all of the state association members as their own. I am not exaggerating. I am being accurate. And by the way, since this time, we have lost Wisconsin. Wisconsin Association of Nonprofit Organizations has shut down. Okay, AFP. When Dr. Robinson and I brought out this one line, may have been one of our team members who gave us, here's what we said. Are ethics important? Of course they are. But if you don't have any money, how important are they? And then we said, there has never been a rule or a regulation, ethics or otherwise, that has prevented somebody from embezzling. No amount of rules is going to stop a person from stealing. 2 months later, this is the cover of Advancing Philanthropy from AFP. Who writes on their own magazine, steer clear? I had it on a coffee table. A guy walked around it like this without even wanting to touch it. He was just trying to steer clear. I'm just doing what it says. Furthermore, here was the positioning statement. Steer clear, ethics, accountability, and regulation. Doesn't everybody want that? Regulations. This is the offer from AFP. This is what they have to offer you. Furthermore, what they are offering you doesn't even work anymore. What chapter luncheon do AFP members skip most? Ethics training. No one goes because no one needs it. Responsibility number 7, confronting the consulting scam, board training, because this is the only product consultants have. We're going to train your board. Feasibility studies, we've already gone over that. Capital campaigns, and remember, feasibility study is really a $25,000 marketing call that you pay so they can win the campaign to win it. And most times very inaccurate in whether the feasibility study reveals, because they want to get the next set of monies from you to run your campaign, money for nothing. As Hall pointed out, the most read article in 2015 at Chronicle of Philanthropy is when my book came out, and I said feasibility studies, the crack cocaine of nonprofit consulting. It's a drug dealer, drug user kind of issue. It works for the board because they get to hire somebody so they don't have to fundraise. The development staff has to go on hold until the feasibility study comes back. And 95% of feasibility studies come back with the same report. Are you ready? You're not ready. And we just charged you $25,000 to tell you what you already know. Okay. If a consultant tells you your board needs training, run. If a consultant tells you you need to perform a feasibility study, run. If a consultant tells you after the feasibility study we'll run your campaign, run. Responsibility number 8, confront the media outlets. Chronicle of Philanthropy, Nonprofit Quarterly, top nonprofit 100 blogs. Here's what kills me about Chronicle of Philanthropy. By the way, that's the picture they took at NANOE when we first paid our board members. New nonprofit puts money over mission and ethics. What kills me about the Chronicle of Philanthropy is they use 28-year-old news reporters to write articles about us. Individuals that are underpaid, that are low paid, that have no nonprofit management experience, that are evaluating us. I'm not going to get involved overly in how our media does and doesn't work in the United States, but you need to know that the individuals that are writing these articles are not qualified. What you don't know about Nonprofit Quarterly is that she doesn't have any reporters. The only people that write for her are other owners of consulting firms, and they are on a news generation column writing system as though they were a reporter. In order for them to be eligible to keep writing, they have to meet certain deadlines, but please remember, it's all consultants selling their own products writing at MPQ. And the bloggers, why the unhinged hubris of Jimmy LaRose and NANOE is toxic to nonprofits. Confront the product sellers. I want you to know you need an Excel spreadsheet. You don't need Blackbaud's Fundraiser's Edge. And I know that's not true for the larger organizations, okay? Not for the larger organizations, but, and you need more than an Excel spreadsheet, but not much more than that. You wanna know why? Because you ain't got no donors. Galas, auction-a-thons companies. And friends, I'll just let you know that as it relates to social media, the Ice Bucket Challenge was a one-off. The average nonprofit that invests in social media and even gets a social media director nationally makes $5,000 a year using social media. The product sellers. Phone campaign boilers, remember, nobody has a phone anymore. Donor management systems, direct mail, special event planners, social media marketing. Overcoming the House of Org, responsibility number 10, confront the aggregators. Now, I'm not talking about our local United Way, but I am wanting to stop the United Way of America, the United Way Worldwide, community foundations and corporate foundations. Please know that last week we just got a Trailblazer Award from our local United Way, and we have local United Ways here. United Way Worldwide sent out a papal bull to all 1,800 of its local affiliates. That was Metro 1, 2, 3, or 4, and here's what it said. United Way Worldwide does not endorse National Association of Nonprofit Organizations and Executives or their related organizations. Further, their viewpoints are inconsistent with United Way best practices on the role of the board in fundraising and governance. I am not lying to you when I got a call from an individual at United Way Worldwide in tears, and she said this, Jimmy, how can you say that board members don't need to fundraise? How can you say this? You are ruining our sector. I'm sorry about that. I apologize. Let me tell you about community foundations. There are 700 in the US right now that hold $91 billion in assets. And a community foundation's executive director's goal is to get as much money in as it can and never give you a nickel. Furthermore, because I know none of you are getting money from your community foundations, 4 months ago, dear donor, worked with them for 25 years. Privileged to know them in their 50s. I was young, and they died in their 80s. They had given a $1 million gift and put it in a donor-directed fund at the community foundation. Do you know why? They got to give the $1 million gift away and get a charitable deduction for it, but it stayed in their donor-advised funds, so it still felt like it belonged to them. And over 25 years, it never got out of the donor-advised fund into the field. This gentleman died on a Friday. On Monday, that $1 million transferred out of that donor-advised funds where it had never been used into the community foundation's account, which was irrevocable. The donor's family contacted me, and we sat down and we pressed through it, and we got that taken care of and got that removed and out of that situation. But there are 91 billion, by the way, of the 700 in the US, 430 did not participate in this census. So this $91 billion in assets is sitting there. And don't forget, a donor gets to get the charitable deduction and give it away, but it's still there and it feels like it's their own. And the story that I just told you is about $1 million sitting in an account for 25 years. So it never got into the field. And the minute that donor passed, the community foundation swiped it. Now, as bad as this is what kills me. For corporate foundations, there are 86,726 in the US holding $1 trillion in assets currently. Do you understand what's happening here? A corporation sets up its own foundation so it can give its money to itself, and they are remiss to distribute it. So how do we overcome the House of Org? This is going to be quick, it's going to be good and powerful, and here we go. Allow me to share with you my super solution. You go around them, you go over them, you go under them, and you go through them. Friends, 99% of life's answers are simply answered by picking up the phone. And when I am confronting an issue, I pick up the phone. Friendships. The way I have been able to overcome the House of Org is through personal friendships. Now, 3 eureka moments. Of course, I got that call from, I'm just reminding myself there of who that was. I'm not going to use their name, but I received that call crying and sharing and telling me we could never do this. I next week got a call from the same person and was told that because Charlotte Berry served in Alexandria on a national board, we were no longer allowed at NANOE to have her be involved, and we would never be able to use her name or brand ever again associated with our efforts. I said, well, that's interesting. I'm sitting here in Charlotte's living room. And you should know that with grace and propriety, she just explained to them, oh, you don't understand. It's just Jimmy. We love him. So please know that Charlotte never would in any way, shape, or form rise up or be abrasive or be aggressive, but she will protect us to the end of our dying day. It is because of a friendship we've been able to contend with United Way Worldwide. I told you about the Community Foundation example earlier ago. How do you deal with the Community Foundation, friends? I'm about to give you platinum. I need you to identify the owner of each donor-directed fund at the Community Foundation, and I need you to get them to empty them. Samantha, are you mouthing how? Yeah. I'm going to tell you how. I'm going to tell you how. Because there will be a Board of Trustees member who serves on that Community Foundation who will absolutely open and give you all the information. You just have to find that one person that's serving on the Community Foundation board, make this case to them, and they will reveal everybody who is in there. And then you must challenge them that that money is doing no good sitting in those bank accounts, and we must divest ourselves. The call on Jimmy LaRose's life is to divest individuals of their wealth because it is the best thing that could ever happen to them. And the way we do it is with friendships. And I want you to know that the individuals that I know on our Community Foundation boards are going to their friends and getting them to empty them. But can you believe for that one friend? Are you willing to wait for the right campaign cabinet chair? Are you willing to wait for that one board member? How do I overcome the community foundations? How do I come over any foundation? The executive director has been hired to do one thing, to throw away your grant proposal that you mailed in. That's what their responsibility to do. I build relationships with people that are serving on the board of the foundation and get them to hand deliver my grant proposal or family foundation proposal every time they gather twice a year. It's through friendships. The super solution to overcoming the House of Org is through friendships. This corporate foundation issue, you and I are now talking about the same corporate foundation. You dealt with arguably the boss hog of corporate foundations. I had a friend who picked up the phone and called the CEO. I sat in the room with the CEO, not the corporate foundation head, but the CEO of the entire proposal, and I handed him the proposal, and I said, just want you to know, even before you open it, there's a $100,000 gift ask in there. And he said, Jimmy, I don't need to even read this. That's cool. This is done. You have to go around them, go over them, go under them, go through them, and you have to do it with your friends. Friends, I came from New York and came to South Carolina, and I'll close with this story. This is a great story, and I'll close with it. I came down from New York to South Carolina, and I got a room at the Capital City Club. And I invited the head of USC, VP for Development, the head of the United Way. I invited the head of the Community Foundation. I invited the head of the SCANPO. I invited 15, 18 people to announce that I was bringing National Development Institute and headquartering it in Columbia, South Carolina. And in my naivete, I didn't realize that in 30 minutes, I alienated myself from the entire state of South Carolina nonprofit system. Then Luke Slater's mom, Louise Slater, came around me. Charlotte Berry came around me. Marshall Foster came around me. And I want you to know, in some respects, I have not just overcome South Carolina, but I have overcome the entire United States as it relates to nonprofit, because I have the right friends. Thank you for being faithful to me. Thank you for allowing me to go an hour and a half with this particular session. We're going to get you out in time. But thank you for spending time with me. I'm Jimmy LaRose. God bless.